There we go. I did nothing but log out and log back in. Hello, everyone. I jumped in and out because my Zoom wasn't letting me record, and we have two people today that aren't able to join live. Just want to make sure we have a recording, but thank you for taking the time to hop on and join together. We haven't been together for 2 weeks in a live call, and I just wanted to bring everyone together. Of course, you have the ebook and videos, plenty of materials, let alone collecting your data and analyzing it, watching blood sugar movement, this, that, and the other. But I wanted to kick off to ask, what are your questions today? But I'm also very curious, what have you learned about yourself so far? And maybe to share as a group, because maybe something you have noticed, someone might not even like thought to cover that area. I start my day often with a short walk, and I was thinking about one thing that this program has taught me is, I've been type 1 diabetic for 30 years. So I've been trying to work on blood sugars for decades. And I've actually kind of designed my interest of working out based on my blood sugars. So I'm working on a yoga certification, and yoga has been coming like, why am I doing this? One, it makes me feel good, but two, it works so well for blood sugar control. But that was kind of my aha this week, even though I've been looking at blood sugars for decades. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with how I used to work out. I used to love Orange Theory. I still love Orange Theory, but I go into it with a lens of blood sugar control, where I much more so walk on an incline when I'm doing the treadmills versus all the sprints. And I weave in a lot more just strength training and yoga to support blood sugar control. So thought I would kick off with that personal anecdote. But please, let's open it up for a discussion. And I'd love to know, what questions do you have specifically? And maybe what have you learned about yourself so far? And I have segmented for Boris to walk us through the weekly report so you can fully understand, like, what's that data telling us? How are those? What are the algorithms? What's going into that, percentages and so forth. So would anyone want to volunteer and ask their questions or share what they've learned about themselves so far? No one has learned anything? Well, a certain food that spiked you, eating a certain time maybe, or workouts affecting you, or surprised about what stress is doing, or maybe sleep deprivation or dehydration, or some things I often will see is if digestion seems off, usually blood sugars are a little more off those days as well. Yeah. Gary, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you have something to share?
Well, I've learned that there's a significant difference between a finger stick in the morning and my glucose monitor.
I was trying to figure out, Boris, do you know offhand, is he on because Gary's using his own Libre, is he on 3 or 2? Do you know by chance? I couldn't tell in the dashboard.
I'm on the 14-day.
14-day. He's on the first one. Yeah.
Okay.
The current Libre I'm working on happens to be a little bit better than the first one.
Yeah.
The first one was pretty wacky.
Yeah.
My perspective.
I wonder if, and this conversation can be related to everyone, I wonder if your physician can get you the Libre 3, as there's been more enhancements there. And if they can't, everyone's welcome to get more sensors from Thea at just $75 a sensor, which is a pretty best price on the market for out-of-pocket expense versus prescription coverage, because the newer ones are a lot better. And also, my endocrinologist has even said, I wonder what's more accurate, a CGM or a meter, because there's so much more enhancements going into a CGM. But again, I think there's a lot more warrant in the Libre 3 and the Dexcom, the current Dexcom, as there's just been more enhancements. But in the meantime, as sometimes your meter is different than your CGM, the best we can do is really watch trends rather than dissect that number.
I'm not, if it'd be like 5 points difference, I wouldn't be concerned. But sometimes it's 20 some points.
Yeah. And FDA allows 20% variance. And if blood sugars are moving, it could be 10 minutes behind. So then that number can be more accurate than it may look. But I would look into, I know it's stressful to not have the data that you think is accurate. I get it, I really do. But maybe what if your next prescription from your physician is the Libre 3? So there's less looking back and forth. But the Libres are not able to be calibrated overall. The first one way back was, but now the newer Libres are not.
Yeah, I can touch on this one, Kelly, if you like.
Sure.
Couple things is we do see that variance, and that's why we created the scoring system to take into account contextually what you're doing as input as an individual versus the raw data. We tested numerous Libre 14-day 2s, 3s, Dexcom, every single finger prick company, and there was variance between all, even finger prick, even position on one arm to the next arm, sensor by sensor, which was kind of shocking given that you dose insulin off these devices and it's already certified to do so. But that was the real draw was, okay, well, if the data can be off 10, 20 basis points, then does that matter in terms of what you're doing? And the answer was, the most important thing is if you're putting in inputs such as food or activities, if we can take that and contextualize it to make it meaningful in terms of if it doesn't spike you too much or you're spiking less, we can take moving averages. So even if the raw number was, not 100% absolute correct, but the moving average came down and your scores were getting better, then you know that you're working on your metabolic health. And then second to that is we are internally working on a calibration system where we can get a lab report and then calibrate the app and the readings to start being equilibrium to those results. So I don't know when that will be done, but it is something we're working on. However, that's why we heavily focus on the scoring instead of raw data, because like you said, it can be off 10, 20 points, which can be, you're pre-diabetic or not in the morning if you're trying to look at that as a raw number. Yeah. Heavily focused getting away from looking at the raw data for this specific reason. And then the moving average will show us a more meaningful picture of health improvements, which is what the scoring is for.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Boris. That was a really good answer. And overall, I sympathize with everyone. This is such a cool program to have unique data coming at you, and it's so many numbers. So not only can you see the line graph of where your blood sugar is, but we're also giving you scores. But we're trying to do our best to give it in a digestible way. But maybe this is a good opportunity to go into our weekly report. Everyone can go into maybe their last weekly report, and I'm going to flip it back to Boris to walk us through what each of those numbers are, because we're giving those numbers again to compensate for the inaccuracies of the CGM sometimes. And again, when there's 3 Libres out, I can't even talk, from Abbott. And I went on the very first one. That's the one I utilized personally. And mine was always 30, 40, 50 points off. And it was torturous. But I still wore it every single day, but still would finger prick, because if I was on the tennis court, I would want to know if I was dropping, even if that 120 arrow down wasn't accurate. I still wanted to understand how blood sugars were behaving. But anyways, Thea has designed this really good software to help compensate. Okay, metabolically, we're going to give you a score, even if your CGM is off 5 points, 10 points, 15 points, if it's off in that allowed window of 20%. But do the best you can to not get caught up in numbers specifically, and define your worth by any numbers, of course. But I'll give it to you now, Boris.
Awesome. Thank you. And if you can let me share, that would be wonderful.
Share screen. I clicked something. Let me know if that worked.
Okay, 1 second. Yep, that worked perfectly. I'll go into the weekly report. Let me know when you guys can see the screen.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, yep. Somebody not good? Everyone good? Okay, cool. So the weekly report is essentially showing you how you're doing from the first week of a sensor to the second week, or if you're wearing them continuously, how you're doing from 1 week to the other on your sensor. And it's similar to the metabolic report, but it's kind of just an automated snapshot that we're giving you. And we're also putting in a little more data in terms of what might be useful for that certain week versus running like a monthly report. So you have 6 buckets of information that we kind of give you at the top. The first one is your glucose spikes, and we're showing you if you had more or less from the week before, right? Because the sensors are, and it's on a 7-day basis, so the sensors are 14 days. So from the first 7 days to the previous ones, how did you do? In this case, I had more glucose dips. I actually had 3 versus 0. My time in range dropped. I was in range more the week before this one. My average glucose increased. My average daily score was the same, and my average food score actually decreased. So I definitely had a less optimized week in terms of metrics. Do you guys want me to go into detail about what these all mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the way we look at spikes is essentially a spike is if something takes you above your green zone 140, which is where the band is, so 72 to 140, that technically counts as a spike. The other thing that counts as a spike is if you're going from a baseline and then you're spiking 30 points plus from that baseline when you have an activity. So the clearest example, again, if your glucose is at 100 and you go to 130, given all the research we have on healthy individuals with CGMs, that's technically not an ideal or a little bit abnormal result. We want you to be spiking less than 30 points. It's showing that there's some stress on that pancreas and there's a little bit more blood sugar in the stream. And if you're spiking like from 100 to 180, you know, that's a bigger spike. And all of those count as spikes. The glucose dips are only when you go under that 72 mark. So even if you're at 71, it's still going to count because that's technically your band. So if you're at like a 70 or a 71, if you had like a 70, 70, 71, and that counts as 3 glucose dips, obviously it's not a huge deal. But if they're going, you know, we've seen people where they go from 200 right back to like a 50. And then so now they went hyper and then they went hypo because they crashed so hard. So that would be something to look into, right? So we give you the technical, this is under the 72, but it's always good to look at those dips and say, hey, you know, was it a 71? If it was, okay, well, you know, I wouldn't probably worry about that. Your time in range is essentially how long during that week were you in your green zone. So your 140 to 72 band. If you're getting out of those, as I mentioned, like say you spiked to 141, you would technically be out of range. And how long you stay out of range, this is what it's calculating, right? So 11% of my week, I was outside of that green zone in terms of blood sugar.
Can I comment, Boris?
Yeah.
I know we have quite a few competitive folks in this group, myself included. And I do want to point out, like, this report is giving you scores, but they're always not 100% truth. For like glucose spikes, especially when you first insert your sensor, there's some wonky numbers going on. So like your blood sugar might not really be spiking, but the sensor's still calibrating, accommodating, you know, the immune response going on in your body saying, hey, what's this foreign object? So those spikes, like, don't judge, oh gosh, I had 32. That's crazy. Like, don't over measure yourself. And then also glucose dips. I'll have clients where they have so many pressure lows when laying on the couch or sleep. So there's so many dips, but really they're not dips. So again, this is just to help guide you. Don't rate yourself exactly on these numbers.
Yeah, very good call out. The other thing to note is we are literally working on this the last week and a half, but the scoring is not gonna. So technically, if you worked out and you spiked past 140, that's a glucose spike, right? It's not an accurate representation to say that that was an abnormal event, because if you're working out or you're in a hot sauna, for example, usually glucose spikes, or you're in a cold plunge. So those 3 variables, we are literally working on the last 2 weeks to put into the scoring system where it's going to show that, hey, you know, even though you spiked, this is the activity that you did, and it was actually a positive result because that's how the body responds. And those will reflect in the reports going forward. So really good call outs, Kelly, plus the two that I mentioned.
Yeah, and a hot shower raises my glucose
Yeah.
at least 20 points every time. But I've learned not to like touch my insulin pump because I know it'll just go back down.
It'll come down. Exactly. Cool. Your average glucose, again, this is probably the one that calibration will help with later if we really need it, but we are showing it. It's going to show you what you were averaging throughout the day or throughout the week, sorry. Your daily scores and your food scores are what the average score was of the activity that you put in for food, and then what the average daily score was. So what's that daily score that you're seeing when you log into the app? And then just taking averages of that 7 days previous to, and then the current one, sorry. So just want to check in to make sure that made sense for everybody. And if you need more context on the top 6.
I have 2 questions for you, Boris.
Yeah.
Food score, what's the time? Is it an hour around that meal? Is it 2 hours that's calculating that score?
It's taking from the baseline 3 hours post.
Okay.
Yeah. So on your food score, it's essentially saying when you logged an activity, what happened the next 3 hours. That's how the food score gets created, because let's say you spiked to 140, but you came down in like a couple of minutes to your green zone. It's going to score higher than if you went up to 150 and it lingered for a couple hours, maybe even all 3 hours, and never went back into the green zone. That would score a lot more poorly, because that would indicate, hey, something really kept your glucose high that you ate from, and let's take a look at that, right? So it does all of that. And then if you dip down, it also lower the score a little bit. So we are trying to take into context, of course, if you have multiple things within those 3 hours, we give them that disclaimer, hey, it might have not been this one that spiked it. Let's take a look at as a whole. And that's something we're working on, looking at, can we find what's the most likely culprit, and making kind of hone in on that activity within those 4 hours.
Yeah.
3.5 hours. Sorry.
Thank you. And I'm going to speak to this to educate a little more. So let's say someone's average food score is not optimal, not, 90% or above, 80% or above. And why? Could it have been they ate the carbohydrates first? I've had a CGMer who's kind of remodeled their average score simply by having that protein first versus daily apple. That's one broad example I've had. Another could be, did that meal just have too many carbohydrates? And another area that I often see average food scores not being great is when the carbohydrates and, oops, sorry, I was getting a phone call. Hopping back. It's when the carbohydrates and fat are both really high. When carbohydrates and fat are high in the body, it's a perfect situation for someone to gain weight. And perfect foods that are examples of this is the pizza, is the ice cream, both high in sugar and high in fat, high in carbs, high in fat. And that's where average food scores might not be great. And it's not don't ever eat ice cream and don't ever eat pizza. Is how can you adjust that to get a better food score, a better blood sugar reading? And often that is driving protein up and having less of that high fat, high carbohydrate food. Pizza with maybe buffalo chicken on top, or pizza with a salad that has some protein. Also, average food score, one of my first beta CGMers, she was a private client, so I knew her really well. And I was like, your chicken thigh and broccoli and green beans, it raised her blood sugar so high. And I spoke to it when I gave Weekly Insight, and I said, I don't think it was your food there. And of course, it was some harsh news she just learned about a coworker that had passed away. And so average food isn't always about the food. And even blood sugars, I really want to lean into, I'm going to help you. This is helping you kind of see what foods are driving blood sugars up or down, or what go-to meals are optimal for steadier numbers. But blood sugar is much more than carbing it better. It can be lack of sleep. It can be that stress. It can be lack of movement. It can be sitting at a desk all day. It can be going too hard, too often without breaks as well. So I went on a tangent there, but hopefully that was helpful. And then average daily score, again, that's where these other 45 variables beyond food play a factor. Again, could it be your period coming up? Can it be your ovulating? Can it be sleep deprivation, stress? Can it be you're just eating too frequently? Is it, again, lack of sitting? It's so helpful. And I know not everyone has the option, but to have a stand-up desk can make all the difference. In one of my weekly community emails, it might have been this week or the last, but it talked about just how standing up can change a complete difference on circulating blood, but also your metabolic rate. As well. So these reports are really cool to look through, and you're not always going to see better progression each week. There's going to be celebratory weeks. There's going to be celebratory meals. And it's not what you do some of the time, it's what you do about most of the time. Again, it's not about abstinence. It's not about eating perfectly. It's learning how to dance with your pleasures, your food, your health, the best way possible. Overall.
Yep.
So
points,
this
Kelly.
is Sherry, are we looking at the higher the food score, the better? And it should be over 90?
Yeah. So technically the higher the food score and the higher the average score, the better. Yep.
And the average American has a blood sugar spike on a daily basis, but average isn't always optimal. So like the fewer the better, the fewer the dips, the better. But knowing that the dips are calculated at 72 and below, I'm not worried if I see a client that has a lot of dips and blood sugars are sitting at 68, 70. I'm worried if the dips are 45, 50, 55. But 68 is healthy for some people.
Yep. And just on the question of how long after do you calculate, on the graph on my amazing travel meal here, jerky, almonds, pistachios, and dark chocolate. It'll, if you open the graph, you'll see we show you half an hour before the activity and then the 3 hours after. So it actually, the activity, when you open it, shows you that time frame if you're ever wondering what it went to and how much and where it evened out.
Thank you.
Yep. 100%. And the last couple things here is we are just giving the 3 top scoring things and then the lowest. Old fashioned beat fruits, I think. So again, right? So some of it's contextual, like let's see what the old fashioned did here.
Wow.
Yeah, it really did nothing,
Wow.
which is crazy because it has sugar in it, right? I actually did this test in Mexico. I had like 6 drinks one night and I logged all of them and my blood sugar was like, didn't spike whatsoever. But the kicker was I was walking networking for 4 hours. Like I didn't stop walking. So the minute, like it was like the drink I know for 100% 6 old fashioned, whatever I had that night, I forgot. That was what was spiking me like crazy. But the fact that I was that active and it was probably hot out and I was getting a little bit sweaty, probably helped just stunt that effect of what I would have had. So another cool insight there.
I'm curious. So that was 5.4. I wonder what your blood sugars were 5.5. I would assume you'd be more insulin resistant the next day. I see beautiful sugars on alcohol and we think, oh,
sure.
I'm drinking, it's easy, it's great. But then when there's no alcohol in the system, blood sugars go high.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not saying alcohol is good, but I just, disclaimer here, I just wanted to point out that the walking stunted that in the moment thing. I still felt the headache afterwards, of course, and blood sugars and insulin. I have seen that where something like this could impact me for the next 2 or 3 days. Like even if I'm back on my same routine, if I do this and it's like, oh, it looks good. And then the next 2 days, I'm like, something's not 100%, right? And that's kind of the kicker. So we're looking at ways of eventually being able to show that and be like, hey, every time you have this, the next couple of days, here's what's going on. And you might think it's today, but it's actually something you did 2 or 3 days ago.
As a diabetic, as a type 1, I have a low go-to food. Like my blood sugar is really low. I know I need a mini Larabar and a date. And that'll bring me back up and make me perfect. But I also have a high food, a high meal. And I had a past CGMer and he's a very social sales guy who's going to these dinners and travels a lot and so forth. So I said, on these celebratory nights, the alcohol, your blood sugar will look good, but you need to have a protocol for high blood sugar day that's going to come. And that might be just a very protein forward, low carb day, really pushing hydration, taking it easy on workouts to not add to the layers of stress of that event. But that's something also to maybe mimic or think about or be inspired by. So after that trip and those old fashions, Morris, I'd say, all right, let's simplify food the next day. Very easily digestible, anti-inflammatory, lower carb, lots of hydration.
Yep, I would agree with you 100%. I was not as good in the gym the next day. Let's just put it that way. Cool. So last couple things, you do get the graph for that week, and you can then just click on the, when you see the spikes obviously outside the green, you can just click on those and dive in. Vegan cheesecake, was a spike. What was there before? Vegan cheesecake and a bow. So yeah, I mean, that was I was at a vegan restaurant, I remember now, in Chicago, and it was a lot of just carb heavy stuff, right? So you can dig in that way. And then the last thing is, if you guys, I know we don't really force you to put titles or descriptions, like we kind of like the image as the main focal point because you can have a lot of context. But if you are putting in keywords or titles, you can always come down and say, hey, when I had the old fashions, so I guess I had it twice. One time it did okay, and then the other time it didn't, right? So that's actually a pretty good example of, okay, well, why didn't it do so well here? And then did I eat something with it before? And it looks like guac and chips I had before that. So that's probably, the kicker was more of that carb in there. But yeah, if you guys are tagging things, you can always search for them here. And if you're eating the same thing, like if you're eating eggs with other things and you're tagging eggs, you could put in eggs, and then it'll show you every time you had egg with a meal. And then you can see if the scores differed, and then dive in a little bit and be like, hey, this one got a 43. Everything else was a 90. Let's take a look. Right. And then see what the culprit was.
And the
So,
the last week going forward on your sensors is, we don't eat too different from day to day. We don't eat that diverse of a diet on average. We eat hopefully 30 ingredients a week, but I know for my first meal of the day, I eat one of 3 meals right now. And what I want to inspire you guys to do is your go-to food that you might have, maybe it's an omelet with turkey bacon and half of a grapefruit. Like, is that meal really serving you? Are you getting a less than a 30-point movement? Are you getting a 20-point movement? Like, try to perfect your go-to meal. And again, we use this oatmeal situation a lot. Some people do oatmeal and berries. Maybe you do less oatmeal, more chia seeds and some lean protein sources, and just kind of identify, how can you perfect your go-to meals? Not even perfect, but improve. I had a client, she's very busy, high like CFO level, and she eats the same thing. And during our CGM program, she's like, wow, my go-to every single day meal right now is moving me 60 points. And while it's healthy, wholesome, real food, had good fiber, she's like, I need to figure out how to tweak that if I have it every single day, too.
Boris, can I ask you a question about that last slide?
yeah, of course.
So-
I can reshare if you like.
When you had like that old fashioned,
Yep.
that means it's your blood sugar started.
You good?
Sorry,
You
I lost your voice for a sec there.
Can you unmute?
There you go.
When you had the old fashioned, it just shows that you started a blood sugar at 147. But explain the start, max, minimum, and average.
So this one, right? Or the other one?
Well, yeah.
This one?
But I was looking at the numbers behind this one.
Yeah, so the 147 start.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So as I was mentioning, for the activity scoring, we give you like where your starting glucose was within that half an hour before and at the point, and then we give you the 3 hours post.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not deducting just because it was high before that. The activity didn't make it high or out of range. Post that activity, it actually was pretty even, which is why it scored high. So whatever this spike was prior to that old fashioned.
I mean, I think you had an old fashioned before that. So I wonder if that old fashioned spiked you, your pancreas squirted out insulin. So then you rode that next old fashioned better, is my curiosity. Or what
Well,
did you eat?
Yeah, it looks like the guac and chips was
Oh, yeah.
first and then an old fashioned. So that's why I was saying that's the guac and chips old fashioned combo definitely went up to, I mean, 185. That's almost, I almost don't hit that ever. And then I had another one and it's kind of even out. So if it was just the old fashioned and the sugars from that, I think we would have probably seen, we did see a little bit from like 114 to 128, but that's within normal range.
Yeah.
And then it kind of held steady. But this looks like might have been the chips more than the old fashioned itself.
And as you're talking about guac and chips, guac's a good healthy fat, but I'll say according to trends, looking at probably 30 different CGMs, a big food that's always in question is rice. For most, if not everyone, rice has been a problem causing spikes. So rice has been very curious. But also guac and chips is something that I've seen spike most people. So
Yeah.
reconsider, take a close look at what go-to foods are to be in question. A Snicker bar would probably do your blood sugar better there than guac and chips. And you would think guac and chips are per se nutrient better, but blood sugar will better. What's the name of the game?
Yeah, I think I also, on this specific example, after the guac and chips, I had a meal that I forgot to tag as well. So that's actually makes a lot more sense now that I think back about it, which again is why even I miss meals, right? So it's not a big deal, but now going back to the data, it took a while to understand why that happened. So if we are logging or trying to be diligent with that, then these contextual conversations just make a lot more sense.
Can you close that window and we'll go back up to your week bar line graph? Go down.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
There we go. One thing I look at when I look at insights each week on Monday and Friday, just kind of having a view, what's going on. I look at, of course, what foods are spiking blood sugars. I look at activities that are near foods. But I also look at this here and I'm like, okay, I see the line go up out of green. I see a spike. Now, is that around the same time each day? And I try to lifestyle wise, where's the time of day problem maybe for clients? Because some clients have them, some don't. I know personally, my hardest blood sugar control is 3 to 5. And it's usually because I'm sitting, not moving that much because I'm working or I'm on calls and I'm presenting often, that I proactively know I need to make time to step outside for 3 minutes for a brisk walk. But I look at time of day as an area to flatten glucose curves beyond food, beyond activity, beyond sleep.
Yeah, it's actually a great point, Kelly, because you can see from May 1st to May 5th, basically didn't have any. It was just kind of even. And I was on the road, prepared my own meals. I got to Chicago where I met my family, and then you could see that the next 3 days, and then it kind of evened out again until here, right? So it's kind of interesting when you look at it from this point of view, because you can see if it's social gatherings, dinners, etc. Are those culprits, and then planning around those, right? So now what I'll do, to Kelly's point, is, I sometimes have networking events, etc. I just look at the menu beforehand, already choose what I'm going to do. And then when I get there, there's not that temptation. I just order that food if I don't want, a huge spike or to drink a lot that night. So,
yeah. I often have a fanny pack as my insulin pump and phone holder, my purse, basically. And I saw a CGMer at a JDRF event Sunday morning. She's like, "Oh, I love your fanny pack." And she's like, "I'm going on travel. Let me look at that." And I was showing her all the pockets in the purse. And I was like, "Oh, of course, there's my protein bar and my jerky." I always have it on me, because if I am starving, I'm at a networking event and this, that, and the other, I always have plan B. I always have plan B. I didn't put those in there that day. They're just always in there. I always have them on hand. I know it's going to get really hot. It'll be 90 here next week. But I usually also often have things in the console of the car. I also have things in my yoga bag. I have plan Bs always around me, and whatever those may be. I love Epic Sriracha chicken jerky. I should get sponsored. And I have right now, it depends on Hungry Buddha or the paleo bars from Designs for Health. Those are quite pricey. Or the Aloha protein bars, and I've picked those bars because I've seen my CGM line and how they behave on me. But even like in Chicago, I love Chicago. I lived there for 10 years. Asian restaurants, sushi, vegetarian restaurants. That's when I'm talking to clients a lot about your blood sugar spiked heavily here, and try to grow confidence and just ability to advocate your needs in a restaurant. And maybe the Asian is, oh, I want no rice, or instead of the rice noodles and the pho, can I just have extra vegetables? Like I've done that all the time with sushi. I love salmon avocado rolls. I'll get a salmon avocado roll, but then I'll also get a lot of sashimi or edamame with it. So it's not just a lot of carbs with that sushi. And sushi rice is often mixed with sugar to help it be more sticky. Sometimes it's mixed with gluten. So sushi is an interesting balance. And then all the Asian cuisines can be very, very sweet sauces. So choosing a very simple dish is preferred. And again, vegetarian restaurants, I went to a 40th dinner at this lovely restaurant here in Columbus that was vegetarian. And I knew going into that restaurant, I was going to stack my day with more protein, but also I wasn't going to touch grains. I was going to reach for more carbohydrates that were high in fiber, is how I steered that. But there's occasions where it'll be harder, but we can do better than otherwise. This is such a great learning experience and discussion going through this report and just talking scenarios. We have still 20 minutes. Do anyone that haven't spoke yet have questions or thoughts, or maybe feeling aha moments from looking at this discussion? Or even Gary, of course, you're welcome to ask more. Oh no, you're muted.
You're on mute, Gary.
Those mute buttons.
Yeah.
I wonder if I can unmute you.
All right.
There we go.
Thank you, Boris. I will be drinking old fashions this weekend to see what happens. I haven't had one now in 3 weeks.
I think I misrepresented my advice.
Yeah.
No problem.
Outside of one beer, I've been pretty alcohol free.
Amazing. Yeah.
And when I do have alcohol, I just kind of build my food better to accommodate. Again, it's not about perfection. It's not about enjoying things that we enjoy. But I won't have, a high fat, high carb meal if I'm having alcohol, because that'll just make blood sugar stickier for the next 24 hours. So just kind of learning through that. Also, coming back to these food scores, activity scores, I want to highlight just the GRACE framework. The GRACE framework is, how can I help someone's blood sugar be better? Beyond the C, the carbohydrate threshold, is there inflammation in the gut? Is there food sensitivities? Is our bowels even moving daily? If there's food sensitivities, can we look into that further? Yes. If people aren't going to the bathroom daily, can we throw probiotics to make it better? Can we give more fiber to make it better? Is the actual mechanical process of the digestive tract impaired? A lot of people who have food poisoning actually have a damaged migrating motor complex. That might have just gone over everybody's head. But if you're not having a daily bowel movement, maybe that's a side session we have. Or you analyze what can be tweaked to improve that. And then going to sleep. I had a client yesterday and she's just really struggling to lose weight. And I was like, okay, let's comb through. Her sleep on average is 6.5 hours. And 6.5 hours only, of course, can, as noted, make one insulin resistant, but it can also prohibit weight loss. So can sleep be better? And it's not, okay, reach for the 9 hours. That's not happening to me this season of my life. But can you get 15 minutes more? On average, women need 15 more minutes than men. Who knew that? On average, women do worse on meals that are equal in carbohydrate, high in carbo. Oh, let me reverse. There's another study and it showed first meal of the day. I always talk about high protein. That's important across the board, but men do better when the meal is high protein, high fat. So a meal that's high protein, high fat would be like an omelet, because the eggs are equal in 6 grams of protein. I think it's 7 grams of fat, might be 6 grams of fat. So it's pretty equal in fat and protein grams. And men will do better on those type of meals versus women. Women need that turkey, bacon, chicken, sausage to lean it out, bring protein up and keep fat down. So there's small differences. Went on a small tangent there, but Think about the gut, think about rest. And maybe it's not just sleep, it's actually letting yourself breathe throughout the day. It's letting yourself take breaks. It's allowing yourself to have rest days. Active recovery is just as important as hard workouts. And then analyze. There's so many things that can be analyzed. Let it be the season of the year. It could be the stress on your plate, the projects you're working on, how much you're moving your body throughout the day, and so much more. So that analyze is basically what the CGM program is putting a magnifying glass on. And then carbohydrate threshold. Maybe your carbs are pretty low throughout all meals. And then one day it's Sunday, and Sunday's like just a celebration with friends, who knows what, and you're eating more carbs overall. It just might cause insulin resistance the next few days because say you're eating 100 grams of carbs most days, and this day you ate 300, you might have some lingering higher blood sugar effect. So it's, what do you do best carb per meal? More people do better very low carb first meal, breaking their fast. Some people do best with their second meal of the day, higher carb, and then dinner lower. But it really depends, and try to use the CGM to identify that. And then eat with the sun, or exercise. I change that eat often. So that eat with the sun can go with the gut health, how to improve, motility, digestion, and so forth. We always want to eat with the sun, but E is exercise, and just the benefit of daily movements throughout the day is much better than 1 hour workout for a number of reasons, including blood sugar control. So as you're trying to improve your numbers, try to fall back onto the GRACE framework and look beyond just, I keep saying carbs, because that's often where we want to just focus. What else needs supported? Alrighty, so we have 1 week left with CGM. We will come together just to answer questions next week. It won't be much education and so forth, but carrying on after these 4-week program, you can continue to get more CGMs. Often at least half of the people do. You do not have to. You can get more CGMs, and you can just order them within your dashboard. When you order more CGMs, unless you're a private client, I'm not providing input on those sensors because the program has been done. But you can do that. You can come into Kelly Schmidt's community, the monthly membership. In the membership, you get the weekly emails and weekly group call on various topics. But you also have the option to have 1 private coaching session a month as needed. Or of course, you can come on as a private client. I have a good big Sunday newsletter coming out this week with a lot of things I'm offering this summer. It's called Slay Summer with Kel. And there's 10 to 12 offers that are coming up this summer, just things that'll help you along progressing on your health journey throughout summer. So keep your eyes open for my Sunday newsletter. But next week at this time, we'll come together just to close things off, answer final questions, and maybe share like how your experience was or what your biggest learning curve about yourself was. You guys have any questions before we wrap up today? No. Well, thank you for taking the time this morning. I will be in your inbox on Friday. Have a look at your weekly reports and kind of analyze how things have been moving along. Now we're on week 3, and definitely as you have the CGM on you, do some experiments. I don't want you to go rogue and paint the town red, but if you enjoy X, Y, and Z at least once a month or once a week, and this program you've buttoned things up, make sure you still try that thing and just see how it behaves. Might not be so bad. Might be crazy. But we don't know until we know. But
We know Gary's experimenting, that's for sure.
Oh, there's
I'll get rave reviews if I tell everyone to have old fashions.
That's the new tagline for the course.
Yeah.
Make brandy.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.